Booze and Lejude. It's a special edition. Aren't they all? I've been gone. Yeah, you might have noticed. I missed Father's Day because I was away. And yet I wanted to do an edition to commemorate fathers, particularly my father and another person who I thought of as my father as well. I just came back from Louisiana, where I went for a funeral, sadly, but it was a funeral of a man who was like a father to me. He was an old Jesuit priest. I say old because he was in his 90s, but when I met him, he wasn't. I met him in college, and he was like a father to me. And why are we talking about him and my own father in an episode of Booze and Lejude? Well, because they taught me about Scotch whiskey. So I want to do an episode on whiskeys. I'm not an expert on whiskeys, but I can tell you a little bit about the differences and what is what and what they're made with, and dedicate it to my own father, who liked his Johnny Walker, and to my friend Father Tom, who was a fan of Chivas Regal, actually, which is a blended Scotch. So let's talk about that and be grateful for our fathers. First of all, whiskey. How do you spell it? Do you spell it with an E? Do you spell it without an E? Well, it depends on where you come from and where you are. Max is drinking water. Can you hear her? I can hear her. Max, come on. Oh, sorry. Well, you can finish drinking water. Oh, I stopped her. She's really thirsty. Anyways, whiskey. W-H-I-S-K-E-Y, W-H-I-S-K-Y. What's the difference? Well, the difference is where you are. So if you're in the United States or you're in Ireland, it's spelled with an E, whiskey. If you're in the United Kingdom or if you're in Japan, which is now coming out with some great whiskeys, they drop the E. So they don't spell it that way. If you order whiskey, typically at a bar here in the United States, they're going to give you bourbon. If I order whiskey in the United Kingdom, maybe not Northern Ireland. If I ask for a whiskey in London, I can tell you they're going to pour me a Scotch if they don't stop and say, what do you mean, right? So just a little heads up. What is whiskey? Basically, it's a fermented cereal grain and aged in an oak cask. So most whiskeys are brownish color. They might be amber, they might be lighter, they might be darker, but that color comes from aging in a wooden barrel and typically an oak barrel. Okay? There it is, basically. Let's talk about Scotch. Now, I don't do a lot of episodes on Scotch because I have a hard time making a cocktail with Scotch. I like drinking single malt Scotch straight. And here we go. We need a new bottle. I'm just saying, I noticed I pulled out all my bottles of whiskey and they're all kind of like almost empty. Sad for me. Sad for me. So, okay, first of all, Glenmorangie, Scotch. In order to call something Scotch, the first thing you have to know is that it has to be totally produced and bottled in Scotland. Otherwise, it ain't Scotch. So Scotch is made primarily of barley, and it's malted barley, and it's heated over a peat fire and distilled for at least, I think it has to be more than 3 years, all right? But typically it's going to be longer than that it's aged. So what is malted barley? What do you mean by malt? Okay, when I was a kid, and even now, if I could get away with it, I drank malted milkshakes. I loved malted milkshakes. Not just milkshakes, malted milkshakes. So they take a powder, which is called malt. Well, malt basically has a taste like it's toasty, it's caramel or caramel, depending where you're from, roasted flavor, right? And it helps to ferment that cereal, that barley, into like a sugar, okay? So with a Scotch, you're going to get a malted flavor, and you're going to get a peaty flavor. Now, it depends on where your Scotch comes from. I mean, you could get something like Glenmorangie, which is like a very, very like high-selling single malt Scotch, right? So it's the go-to. It's my go-to because it's affordable for a single malt, but people like it. And so this is from the Highland area, or you could get something like a Laphroaig from the Islay region, and you don't even know you're drinking the same drink. So Laphroaig is like peaty, smoky, iodine-y, whereas this is going to be a little bit cleaner. You've got the Speyside region. I like Campbelltown region Scotches because it has a little bit of that peaty iodine taste, but it's not just like boom, like smack you in the face. By and large, Scotch whiskey tends to be a smoky flavor, right? So there's Scotch. That's my favorite. You've got single malt, you've got single grain, you've got blended malt like the Dewar's, you got blended grain, Bob's your uncle, so all sorts of different types of Scotch, but from Scotland, malted barley over peated fire, like peaty fire, and Bob's your uncle. That's Scotch. Now, Irish whiskey. I'm not an expert, and I can tell you I need a new bottle of this too. Irish whiskey. So Jameson, famous Irish whiskey. Bushmills, famous Irish whiskey. And like with all the other whiskeys, EY, lots of craft whiskeys coming out now in Ireland. So I haven't had them. I don't know much about Irish whiskey, but the Irish will tell you, and I think they're right, that of the whiskeys, it's the smoothest. So just to talk about what the difference is, Irish whiskey is made from a yeast fermented grain mash or mash of malted cereals. It takes about 3 years to age, again, in a wooden cask. So again, a smoother finish with Irish whiskey. Aaron Gobra. There you go. That's Irish whiskey. Let's talk about bourbon. Bourbon. If it's bourbon, it's made and bottled in the United States of America. If it's not, it ain't bourbon. So bourbon is made, it has to be 51% or more corn mash. So the grain we're using with bourbon is corn. It's a sweeter, it's a little bit smoky, but again, the reddish color due to the fermentation in charred oak casks. So, that's my wine. Let's see. Here's bourbon. Bullet, like the ammunition sun. So, I always go to Bullet. But if you go in the bourbon section anywhere in the United States, there's 5 million new craft bourbons, and they're amazing. So, corn whiskey, that's what we're doing here. It has to be 51% corn. Now, bourbon was first created in Kentucky, so we'll talk about Kentucky bourbon. There's a Tennessee whiskey, which is a type of whiskey obviously produced in Tennessee. It's a different method of filtering, and I'm not really familiar with it, except I know they use charcoal. So, but you can get bourbon. Bourbon can be made outside of Kentucky, but it has to be made in the United States of America. 51% corn, a little bit sweeter tasting, a little smoke, but not like the smokiness of Scotch. And I'm going to say it's smooth, but again, the Irish are going to fight for we have the smoothest whiskey. Okay, so that's your bourbon. Rye. Rye is typically North American. Now, when we used to talk about Canadian whiskey, we almost always meant rye. That's not so much the case anymore. Canadian whiskey is not necessarily always rye whiskey. But obviously, when we're talking about rye, in the United States, rye whiskey, 51% rye, which is like a family of the wheat. It's a grass, right? So rye tends to be spicier. It's a great, you make cocktails with it. It's a great cocktail mixer. So there's rye. The Japanese are making whiskey. Yes, they are. So, Japanese whiskey, no E. Obviously, produced, bottled, made in Japan. It's double malted with a peated barley, and it's aged in a wooden cask. It can be smokier. It can be a single or blended malt. I have to tell you, the first time I had it was, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago, going through Heathrow in London, when I used to live in London. Not that I'm bragging. And, the cool thing about traveling internationally through Heathrow is like the Scotch whiskey place, just has stuff set up and here, try this. I'm like, yeah, it's 6 a.m. I'm flying, sure, I'll try one. And the guy is he had hibiki, which it's in this cool bottle. It's it's just the coolest bottle. And he said, this is Japanese whiskey. And I went, huh? It was so good. Very smooth. That I wanted to just drink straight as could be, right? So, it's, the hibiki now, it was affordable then. Now it's like $100 a bottle if you can even find it. Suntory is another one. But the Japanese whiskey without the E is Japan is coming strong into the whiskey market, and they're making really great whiskeys. Look, that's what I know about whiskeys. My favorite whiskey, Scotch. Judy loves her single malt Scotch. It's my winter drink. I drink it. How do I drink it? I drink it neat. I drink it without ice, just 2 fingers and a glass, and I'm going to do that for you now. My dad used to drink Johnny Walker Red Label, and I think he drank it with water on the rocks. My friend Father Tom, also my father, liked his Chivas Regal, I believe, on the rocks, maybe with a little water. For me, when I drink a blended Scotch, like Dewar's and soda, that's the only cocktail I really allow myself to go with Scotch. I don't know. I've said it before. I did make a Scotch cocktail. I think I made a Rob Roy. Did I? I don't remember what I made, but I was terrified to drink it. It was okay, but I just want it to taste like Scotch. I don't want it to taste like anything else. And so with Scotch, I don't like making Scotch cocktails. I like drinking it straight. And so I'm gonna take a little Glenmorangie, and I'm not even gonna pour 2 fingers. I'm just gonna pour 1 because I don't want to empty my bottle. How sad is that? So guys, those of you who are fathers, I hope you had a great Father's Day. Those of you who are Scotch drinkers, good for you. Like I said, I learned about Scotch from my dad. I learned about Scotch from Father Madden and his Jesuit brethren who you'd have a party and you'd have Scotch on the bar and they'd bring a cheap bottle of vodka and then they'd drink your Scotch. They all drank Scotch. So the thing I would say about it, and like most whiskeys, it's like when you're taking your first drink of alcohol at the legal age of 21 in this country or 18 in others, and you take a drink of Scotch, you're going to be like, whoa, because, your body is looking for sweet stuff. It's looking for the frou-frou drink. So, when they say Scotch, probably all whiskey is an acquired taste, or, you're going to want to mix it with something sweet like bourbon and Coke, or, bourbon and 7-Up or something like that. Because you're just not, you do have to acquire a taste for it, because you taste alcohol and it burns the throat, right? But as you start to acquire that taste and you start to you can smell I can smell the peat in here, but I can also smell it's fresh and clean. It's just, I know the difference between Scotch and if I were smelling bourbon. So it's great to sort of acquire this taste and find out what you like about certain whiskeys, what you might not like. I don't prefer really peaty, heavy iodine taste. I'm going to drink it if you're giving it to me, but it wouldn't be my first choice in a whiskey. So by all means, check it out. Here's to the dads, here's to my father, here's to my pal Father Tom, who I miss very much. I miss them both very much. And to all you folks out there who are whiskey lovers, and to all you folks out there who are dads, happy belated Father's Day, Salute. Right away you get the smoke. You get the smoke, and smoke in a good way. So if you like the smoky taste though in the actual alcohol itself, go Scotch. Maybe go Suntory or go a Japanese whiskey. If you want something that's a little bit sweeter, not smoky, bourbon. Okay. If you want something that, you know what, I don't get a lot of smokiness with Irish whiskey. It's triple distilled, so you want something very smooth that's not gonna sometimes I really like the sort of burn that I get in my throat, little burn from Scotch. Don't get that so much with Irish whiskey. And rye, I love the spiciness of rye, and again, for great cocktails, I like sipping rye neat as well, but rye makes really good cocktails because it's interesting. It's got distinctive spicy flavors in it. So try them out, check it out, guys. Thanks for joining me. We'll catch you again on another edition of What Is It Into? Take it easy.